At 56, I realized something that scared me more than debt. It wasn't the empty bank account. It wasn't the divorce papers. It was a quiet thought that kept showing up every Friday night. This might be it. This might be how my life sounds from now on. No arguments. No laughter. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the question of whether I'd get used to it. If you're watching this and you've ever sat alone, pretending the silence didn't bother you, you already know where this is going. My name is Harold. I'm 56 years old. For most of my adult life, I was the guy people trusted with their money. I spent 15 years as a financial advisor in Seattle, telling clients what they didn't want to hear and helping them sleep at night anyway. I knew how to calm panic. I knew how to explain risk. I just didn't know how fragile my own life was until the numbers stopped adding up. The bank downsized. My department disappeared. Not long after, my marriage did too. The divorce took the house, a piece of my retirement, and something harder to measure, my certainty that if you play by the rules long enough, life eventually rewards you. Now, I rent a small 2-bedroom apartment in Tacoma. The walls are thin. So thin I can hear my neighbor's TV and tell when he's watching game shows instead of the news. Every sound reminds me I'm not part of anyone else's evening. My mornings start the same way: cheap coffee, a tired pickup truck, and a shift at the supermarket in customer service. It's honest work, but it's a long way from where I used to be. Nights are worse. I sit at the kitchen table with a calculator and a notepad, figuring out how to stay afloat without leaning on credit cards again. I don't call it fear. I call it being responsible. But some nights, responsibility feels a lot like loneliness with a better name. My son calls once or twice a week. He's doing well. Steady job, stable life. He means well when he says, "Dad, you should find someone. Someone you don't have to think about bills with." I laugh and change the subject. It's easier than admitting that after years of holding everything together, I don't know how to want something for myself without feeling guilty. One afternoon in the break room, a coworker slid his phone across the table. "It's a dating site," he said, "for people over 50. I told him I wasn't interested. He smiled and said, "None of us are. Until we are." That line followed me home. That night, the apartment felt especially quiet. I opened my laptop, telling myself I'd just look. No expectations. No risk. I uploaded a photo where I looked presentable: flannel shirt, coffee mug, trying not to look like a man who measures life in receipts. I filled out the basics. Divorced. 1 adult son. Not looking to be saved. Not able to save anyone else. When it asked what I wanted, I froze. The honest answer was simple and embarrassing. I wanted weekends that didn't feel like a punishment. That's when I saw her. Linda, 51. A school nurse from a small town outside Tacoma. In her picture, she stood in a school hallway holding a box of bandages. Behind her was a sign that read, "Nurse Linda, the calm in the chaos." Something about that stopped me. Maybe because my own life felt like chaos pretending to be routine. Her profile was straightforward. No filters. No big promises. I love kids. I don't love debt. I'd like someone I can sit with on a Friday night and be quiet without it getting awkward. I read that line twice. Quiet without it getting awkward. That was the thing I didn't know how to ask for anymore. I stared at the message box longer than I want to admit. At 56, typing a simple greeting felt heavier than it should. Because saying hello meant admitting I wasn't done yet. And part of me had grown comfortable pretending I was. That was the moment the real choice showed up. Not the website. Not her profile. The choice between staying hidden behind numbers and routines or stepping toward a real person with an imperfect life and letting the outcome be uncertain. I knew exactly what my instinct was: to stay safe, to stay detached, to keep control. I also knew where that instinct had landed me. So I wrote the truth, stripped of any cleverness. I've spent my life counting other people's money. Maybe it's time I stop counting worst-case scenarios for one evening. Coffee after work. I hit send and immediately wished I hadn't. Hope has a way of making you feel foolish before it makes you feel brave. I set my phone down. Made a sandwich, checked my bank balance even though I already knew the number. I told myself she wouldn't answer, and that would be fine. At least then I wouldn't have to wonder. An hour later, my phone buzzed. "Coffee sounds cheaper than a therapist," she wrote. "I'm free Saturday after my shift." I stood in my kitchen, staring at the calendar on the fridge, mostly empty squares and overdue reminders. For the first time in a long while, Saturday didn't look like an obligation. It looked like a risk worth taking. I turned off the light and felt something shift, not excitement, not romance, but permission. Because the tension wasn't about whether she'd like me. It was about whether I'd walk into that cafe already judging her, already judging myself, already turning two imperfect people into a problem to solve. The real question wasn't about coffee. It was about whether I could stop seeing myself as a failing investment and start seeing myself as a man still allowed to choose. And as I went to bed that night, one thought stayed with me. If I show up, I'm not just meeting a woman. I'm challenging the quiet belief that my best days are already behind me. And I didn't yet know if I was ready for the answer. The moment she pushed the check toward the middle of the table, I knew this wasn't going to be a normal first date. Not awkward small talk bad. Not no chemistry bad. Worse. The kind of moment that tells you exactly who you are about to be, before you've decided if you can live with it. I'm sitting there in a family restaurant just off the highway. The kind of place where the coffee is always too hot, the soup of the day never changes, and nobody is pretending this is special. I arrived early out of habit and chose a seat where I could see the entrance and the register. Old instincts die hard. If you've ever made a living managing risk, you know what I mean. Linda walked in while I was considering whether showing up 10 minutes early counts as optimism or anxiety. She wore a blue sweater with a small school logo stitched on the chest. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, like she'd done it without a mirror. In her hands was a canvas tote covered in children's drawings. She smiled when she saw me, tired but real. "If you're here to impress me with expensive wine," she said as she sat down, "you should know I only drink what comes with a coupon." I laughed. It felt easy, dangerous even. We ordered simply. Soup. A sandwich, coffee, nothing that required commitment. The conversation moved carefully, at first, work, weather, small complaints about traffic. She talked about school nurses being half medical staff, half emotional triage. I talked about working customer service at the supermarket and learning how many ways people can be angry before noon. It felt calm. And that's what worried me. When the waitress placed the check on the table, everything shifted. Linda didn't reach for her purse. She leaned back slightly, like someone bracing for impact. Then she took a breath that told me she'd been holding it for a while. "I need to say something now," she whispered, not looking at me. "Before I mess this up by pretending." She slid the check a few inches toward me. "I can't afford this tonight. I thought I could, but today I paid for my mom's medication and gave my brother gas money. I'm short. And I hate that I'm saying this on a first date, but I hate lying more." There were no tears. No drama. Just exhaustion. "If you want to leave," she added, finally meeting my eyes, "I'll understand. I'm not looking for someone to save me. I just don't want to start anything by acting like my wallet is fine when it isn't." In that moment, two versions of myself showed up. The first was the man I used to be, the advisor who knew the rule by heart. Avoid complicated situations, especially financial ones. The guy who believed stability was something you protected by walking away early. The second was the man sitting there now, divorced, renting, counting pennies at his own kitchen table. A man who knew what it felt like to be reduced to a balance sheet. This was the choice. Not about money, about posture. I could play the role of the capable man, pay the check, smile, let her feel small without meaning to. Or I could be honest in a way that might end the night right there. I picked up the check. "I'll cover it," I said. "Not because you owe me, and not because I'm comfortable. I want to see you again. That's all." She froze for half a second, like she was trying to translate. "And next time," I added, "we can just get coffee. Or walk. Or you can bring a thermos, and I'll bring the bad jokes." Her shoulders dropped. "Just a little." "You sure?" she asked. "I'm sure about one thing," I said. I don't want this to end, because we were both afraid of being honest. Outside, the evening had cooled. We stood near her old Toyota, the kind of car that tells you exactly how long someone's been prioritizing other people over themselves. I thought you'd disappear after that, she said quietly. Most men do. I've already tried disappearing, I replied. Didn't work out. She smiled, not relieved, not excited. Something steadier. As I drove home, I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel romantic. I felt exposed. Because the truth was, paying that check didn't make me generous. It made me visible. The real tension wasn't whether I could afford dinner. It was whether I could afford to keep seeing someone who looked at money the same way I did, as something that follows you home, sits at the table with you, and quietly judges your character. And as I pulled into my parking spot, one thought stayed with me. If I keep seeing her, this won't be about who pays. It'll be about whether two people who are already stretched thin can stand being honest out loud. I didn't yet know the answer. But for the first time since the divorce, I knew I wasn't pretending not to care. And that scared me more than the check ever could. The first time someone else made me feel small for being with Linda, it wasn't subtle. It was quiet, casual, almost polite. And that's what made it worse. We agreed to keep things simple after that first dinner. No restaurants. No checks sliding across tables. Just walks and coffee in thermoses. Saturday mornings in the park near the lake, where retired couples fed ducks and young parents pushed strollers, pretending not to look exhausted. It felt safe there. Neutral ground. Like life wasn't asking us to explain ourselves. Linda told me more about her life in pieces. Her mother's health. The medications she managed. A brother who couldn't seem to keep steady work, but always needed gas money or help just until next week. She said it without bitterness. Just facts. Like a nurse giving a report. By the end of the month, she said once, sometimes I've got $10 left. And I stand there wondering if that's my dignity fund or another prescription. I didn't joke. I understood that sentence too well. At the same time, my own footing started to wobble. The manager at the supermarket mentioned that my contract might not be renewed. The word might sat heavy in my chest. The IRS sent another letter, polite, firm, impossible to ignore. I didn't tell Linda yet. I wasn't hiding it. I just wasn't ready to hear it said out loud by someone else. My son was less patient. Dad, he said over the phone, you're barely keeping your head above water. Are you sure getting involved with someone who has even more responsibilities is smart right now? Smart. That word again. As if life past 50 is supposed to be a strategy game. The pressure didn't come all at once. It built. Slowly. Like humidity you don't notice until it's hard to breathe. Then Linda invited me to a family lunch. Nothing formal, she said. Just food. I told them you're good with numbers. That should have warned me. Her mother was kind. Tired, but sharp. She asked about my work, my son, my old career. I answered carefully. Her brother was different. He smiled too much. Joked too easily. So you're the financial guy, he said, poking at his food. Maybe you can tell us how not to drown. Just don't turn Linda into another charity case. Huh? He laughed. No one else did. It landed like a verdict. Not because it was cruel, but because it was familiar. I'd spent my life evaluating risk, and now I was being evaluated. Not as a man, as a liability. In that moment, I felt something old and sharp rise up. Shame. The kind that asks whether you belong at the table at all. This was the choice. Not about Linda. About me. I could stay quiet. Let it slide. Try to prove, slowly, that I wasn't another problem to manage. Or I could say the thing that might end this before it went any further. After lunch, in the parking lot, I spoke first. If you're looking for someone who can fix everything, I said to Linda, keeping my voice steady, I'm not that man. I've already tried being the solution. It cost me everything once. She didn't answer right away. That scared me more than anger would have. You think I want another wallet? She said finally. I wanted someone who doesn't look at me like a spreadsheet. Her voice cracked, not at me, but at the world that kept measuring us both. We drove away in separate cars. No fight, No promises. Just space filled with doubt. That night, back in my apartment, I sat at the table with my calculator and didn't turn it on. For the first time, the numbers weren't the loudest thing in the room. The question was I protecting myself? Or was I walking away before anyone else could decide I wasn't worth the trouble? I didn't know yet, but I knew something had shifted. Because once you feel judged for who you're with, staying stops being romantic. It becomes defiant. And I wasn't sure which version of myself I was ready to be. Silence doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks in. It starts as a delayed reply, then a short message, then nothing. And if you've lived long enough, you know the difference between someone being busy and someone deciding not to explain themselves. After that lunch with her family, Linda's messages slowed down. Not dramatically. No arguments. No confrontation. Just fewer words. Long shift. Mom had a rough night. Then, eventually, messages marked seen without an answer. I told myself it made sense. I told myself not to read into it. But every unanswered message landed like a quiet conclusion she hadn't said out loud yet. I went back to my evenings with the calculator and the lamp. Same chair. Same table. Same numbers. Only now, every total felt heavier. Not because it was bigger, but because I kept wondering if I was becoming someone people needed to manage instead of choose. A week later, I saw her at the supermarket. I hadn't planned on it. I was just there to buy the cheapest things that still counted as food. Pasta, frozen vegetables, milk. I was halfway down the aisle when I noticed her at the checkout. Her basket was small, too small. The kind of basket that tells you someone is counting as they go. I stood still, pretending to read labels, watching without meaning to. She pulled out coupons. One after another. The cashier read the total. Linda hesitated, then quietly slid a box of cookies back across the scanner. Something in my chest tightened. Not pity. Recognition. I didn't walk up right away. I waited until she was heading toward the exit, her keys already in her hand. "Hey," I said. She stopped. Slowly, like she already knew it was me. "I was wondering if you were avoiding me," I said. Not accusing. Just tired. She let out a breath she'd clearly been holding for days. "I didn't want you to see this," she said, gesturing back toward the checkout. "I wanted you to keep the version of me who jokes about coupons, not the one who counts every dollar in line." There it was. Not rejection. Fear. She wasn't disappearing because she didn't care. She was disappearing because she cared too much about how she looked doing it. "I thought if I stepped back," she went on, "you'd remember me as the calm nurse with a sense of humor, not as someone who has to choose between cookies and gas." I looked at her grocery bag. Light enough to carry with one hand. Heavy enough to explain a lot. This was the choice I hadn't named yet. I could comfort her. Tell her it didn't matter. Pretend this was temporary. Or I could be honest in a way that might make things uncomfortable, but real. "I've already been in a relationship where we pretended," I said. "I pretended I was always fine. She pretended she was always happy. It ended quietly and painfully. I don't want that again." She didn't interrupt. "If this is what your life looks like right now," I continued, "then this is what I'd be seeing anyway. Coupons don't scare me. Pretending does." She stared at the pavement between us. Then nodded. "I'm tired of being impressive," she said. "I'm just tired." I felt that sentence settle into my bones. She looked up. "If we're going to do this, I don't want guessing games. I don't want you wondering what I can afford. I want you to know." "Then let's do that," I said. "Let's stop performing." She hesitated. "Tomorrow. The park. I'll bring my numbers. You bring yours." There was no romance in the invitation. No promise. Just a challenge. As she drove away, I stood in the parking lot holding her light grocery bag, watching her taillights disappear. I realized something then. Respect doesn't come from hiding weakness. It comes from letting someone see it and choosing not to turn away. That night, I sat at my table again. The calculator was still there. So was the lamp. But this time, I didn't start counting money. I started counting what I was afraid to show. Tomorrow wasn't about budgets. It was about whether honesty would cost me this relationship or finally make it possible. And for the first time, I understood why silence had felt so heavy. It wasn't absence. It was a test. When I was about to answer, I used to believe love was a feeling. At 56, I'm starting to believe it's a decision you make after you see the receipts. The next morning, I arrived at the park early, holding a thermos of coffee like it was a peace offering. The lake was calm, the kind of gray-blue calm that makes you think of unfinished conversations. I chose the same bench we'd used before, the one that faced the water and gave you the illusion that life was simple if you stared at it long enough. Linda showed up 10 minutes late, breathless, apologizing with the kind of tired smile people wear when they've already spent half their day taking care of someone else. She carried a small folder and a notebook. No purse. No pretending. She sat down and didn't waste time. "I don't want you guessing," she said. "I don't want you trying to read my face at a restaurant and decide whether I'm okay. I want you to know. And I want us to decide what we do with what's real." She opened the folder. Neat lists. Lines of numbers. Her nurse paycheck. Her mother's medication costs. Utilities. Gas. A small credit payment. And the worst part, the family help category that wasn't optional, because guilt had a way of making it mandatory. "I'm not proud of this," she said quietly. "But it's true. And I'm tired of being ashamed of true things." I watched her hands. Steady. Not dramatic. This wasn't a confession designed to win sympathy. It was a boundary. "My turn," I said. I pulled out my own notebook. "I told you in episode 1 I used to organize other people's money. What I didn't tell you is how hard it is to organize your own life when you don't trust it to stay still. My supermarket income, rent, insurance, the IRS payment plan I kept postponing until I couldn't, a credit card balance I hated myself for. I didn't soften anything. I didn't add hopeful language. I just showed her the numbers. For a long minute, we sat there like two men in a garage staring at a broken engine, deciding whether it's worth fixing. Except we weren't looking at a machine. We were looking at ourselves. "This isn't romantic," Linda said. "No," I replied. "But it's honest." Then the real choice arrived. The one that doesn't show up on apps or first dates. The one people our age don't talk about out loud. I could look at those pages and think, we're both too stretched. We should walk away and find someone easier. Someone with fewer obligations. Fewer dents. Someone who wouldn't make the future feel like work. Or I could look at those pages and think, this is exactly why it matters. Because easy isn't always real, and real is the only thing that lasts. I cleared my throat. "I can't promise you will ever sit in expensive restaurants and pretend money doesn't exist," I said. "But I can promise you something else. I won't disappear because your life is complicated. I won't punish you for being honest." Linda's eyes stayed on the paper. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of you. Of the moment you see how messy it is and decide you deserve better." I understood that fear. I'd lived inside it since my divorce. "I'm scared too," I said. "That I'll stay for the wrong reason. That I'll confuse loneliness with love. So here's my promise. If I ever feel like I'm holding on because I'm afraid to be alone, I'll say it. Out loud. Before it turns into resentment." That was the first time I saw her truly relax, not because the numbers changed, but because the rules did. "And I'll promise you this," she said. "If I feel ashamed, I won't push you away and call it being practical. I'll tell you the truth, that I'm scared you'll judge me." We sat in silence, the kind of silence you can live inside without it getting awkward. After a while she said, almost to herself, "I kept thinking, after that dinner, maybe we should have stopped. Like it would protect you from my chaos." I looked at the lake, the ducks, the parents, the older couples walking slowly, as if they'd already learned what mattered. "That's exactly why I'm staying," I said. "Because you said it out loud. Because people who admit their chaos are safer to me than people who pretend they've got everything under control." Linda's throat moved like she was swallowing something heavy. "Okay," she whispered. "Then we plan. Not dream. Not promise forever. Plan." We talked quietly about practical things. cheaper dates, cooking at home, setting limits with her brother, calling my son less like I needed permission and more like I wanted him in my life. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a map. When we finally stood up, the folder went back into her bag, and my notebook went back into mine. The money situation hadn't changed. The obligations hadn't disappeared. But one debt did. The debt of pretending. As I walked to my truck, I realized something I wish I'd known years ago. You don't stop being worthy of love because your life has numbers in the red. You stop being ready for love when you hide those numbers and call it pride. If you're watching this and you've been telling yourself it's too late, or you're too complicated, or you're not set enough, listen to me. The point isn't having a perfect balance. The point is having someone who doesn't treat your truth like a flaw. I drove home with the same bank account I had the day before. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a failing investment. I felt like a man who chose to stay.